welcome to Straight Talk Live. We are live. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning again this Thursday in the universe for Straight Talk Live, a nonprofit that really is exploring the convergence of human transformation, digital transformation, and social impact. And we have an amazing show for you today. I am your host, Rick Snyder, one of your co-hosts, actually, Rick Snyder, CEO of Invisible Edge and head of culture for Refound, author of Decisive Intuition. And I'm joined by my amazing, esteemed co-host, Af Malhotra. Af, take it away.
Very kind of you, Rick. Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome again to a fantastic Straight Talk.live show. Today we have one incredible human being who's not just a fantastic business leader and technology leader, but who's going to try and unpack this whole concept of inclusive capitalism that we on the show have become very familiar with because of the past guests we've had. And it's part of our manifesto, actually, to talk about the social impact, community impact aspects of big enterprise, 3.4.0 enterprise. So I'm, of course, the co-host of Straight Talk Live, the co-founder of Growth Enabler. And without further ado, Rick, let's crack on and let's introduce our guest.
Okay. So today we're going to be diving into digital technology as a driver for inclusive capitalism. And what does that even mean? How can technology actually support a more diverse and inclusive system and market? Is that even possible? Is that an oxymoron? Let's dive deeply and discuss that. So without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest for this next hour, Robert Jamieson. Robert, welcome to Straight Talk Live.
Hello, Rick. Many thanks for welcoming me on board, and hello, everyone else.
Excellent. And let's just start with your background. So for those who might not know about you from our audience, could you just share a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you are, and we'd love to hear just a little recap of that.
So I'm currently the Group Chief Digital and Technology Officer for Legal & General, the third largest insurer in the United Kingdom, big company, globally located. I've been here 10 years. I've had a number of different experiences. It's a terrific company, terrific customers and clients. And before that, I spent 17 years in technology companies. So my heart is around engineering and the art of the possible through technology and data.
Excellent. So let's start there first, Robert. What I'm curious about for you is, you know, we all have our personal interests and drives. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we're not, but it leads us to our next destinations in our careers, in our lives. So I'm just curious for you, what is it that has been what's been drawing you, what really excites you about this whole world of technology and also capitalism and how they merge?
So it would be about half a decade ago, I was managing customer services in one of our divisions. And this is the retirement division. So these are elderly people. Some of them are very, very vulnerable. And we were looking at ways in terms of improving outcomes, how you could, through digitization, and whether or not that was possible for such a demographic. And I guess we got really excited as we were progressing both the challenge and some of the solutions, and seeing a client base that was getting drawn in, where we were helping them. I found that quite profound, and I think that's where I got much more into, you know, what I would call the digital side of things, how you engage with customers, both from retail customers, both from a data and digital perspective. Of course, it's much broader than that, and I think that leads into your next part of the question: inclusive capitalism.
And what exactly is that? Let's unpack that a bit further. How do you think make sense of that?
So if I think both public and private investment finance can exist side by side. I think that's an important point. There's not enough housing. There's an unequal society. There's climate change, and it's important that we harness all forces, all possibilities in terms of working through those huge, perhaps at times intractable challenges. If I bring it alive by a simple part, by a part of our business. So I talked about our retirement business. We've got 1.6 million retirement customers. We pay them monthly, and we're looking for an asset base that can also pay those liabilities on a monthly basis. A lot of that is bonds, but actually some of it can come through other asset types. And this is where the inclusive capitalism can come alive. Companies could choose to invest in big tower blocks that extract huge rents in the City of London or in other expensive cities. But what we've done is to choose a path where perhaps we can invest in more inclusive things, such as social housing, retirement homes, reinvesting in some of our city centres and things like that. And that brings alive the whole concept of inclusive capitalism. Inclusive capitalism is inclusive finance. We could probably make that more powerful. So I'll make that more powerful. Let's put around it climate change. I mentioned that. Aging demographics, and then of course responsible business. So, I already talked about that we invest a lot in retirement homes, but we also own, house building companies. We have made investments in wind farms. So our wind farm investments power 2 million homes in the United Kingdom. That draws in the climate part of things. We also invest in electric cell companies as well, and PodPoint for electric car hires. Again, it's like we feel that we can use our investment, our long-term investment, for the improvement in society and a much more inclusive society.
Robert, one of the things we found intriguing through this entire journey with Straight Talk Live is that we've had different C-suite leaders, if you want to call them that, from different companies talk about their sort of manifesto when it comes to doing good and making a difference to society, to the new sort of evolving formation of business. And often we see this pressure on executives, and they've spoken quite openly about the fact that for a long time, at least for 3 decades or more, large enterprise has been forced to think in a very short-termist way, quarterly numbers, output massively about shareholder value. In fact, it's not just companies, even those people who were the entire chain of the employee from graduate school to business school to first job, second, third job, and management and leadership. We've had a similar sort of mindset. We've been so focused on, to some extent short-termism, but actually giving shareholders a ton of value. In fact, Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great, I remember when I was much younger and I did my MBA, it was the gospel. It was like, oh, you got to read this book. This is the book. It's about from good to great. And in fact, that book is, at this moment after the pandemic, I wonder whether that philosophy and that ideology actually is still relevant. And so one of the questions we always ask is, big companies, whoever they may be, have been buried in this quarterly cycle. And we start to talk about long-termism or the long game, thinking way ahead. And I'll refer to a gentleman called Mike Brown, who is the head of innovation for the Department for Defense in the US. And I was privileged to listen to him about 2 weeks ago on a Hoover Institute webinar, where he spoke openly about some of the big transformations US companies thinking about seriously, and I would imagine it's the same with Europe and other large organizations, where they, to drive change, to create transformations, be it digital talent transformations, transformations around cause and purpose, higher sense of purpose. They're looking at whether a 10-year cycle is going to be better for a business. So a CEO doesn't hang around for a couple of years and says, great, I've done my bit, time for me to move on to the next organization. So what are your thoughts around, and you don't have to refer to the company you're in, you can talk about it in general. What are you seeing out there as being, and we're looking for hope, we're looking for a little bit of hope. So are you seeing a positive shift in the mindset of chief digital technology officers, CIOs, and even CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers out there, where the collective of these C-suite guys and gals are thinking, well, actually, yeah, it is time to change the way we look at shareholder value and think in a long-term way about our business, because that talks to inclusive capitalism way more closely and intimately than yesterday's way of operating. So a long-winded example and context setter, but what are your thoughts?
Again, I said in one of my earlier answers, so our particular company, Legal & General, invests for the long term. That's part of the business model. Our customers have a 100-year life, and we offer products at every stage of that life. I guess in terms of your other question, in terms of quarterly type reporting into stock markets, there's still a choice for companies, isn't there? I know that there's a number of companies out there that exist for much more longer term, much more societal type philosophies. Those companies exist, with the OECD. They exist in other international forums as well. So there is a beginning. It's probably more than a beginning as well. You've also got companies that club together. They know their climate impact. Yeah. So if you're a big a user of plastic or cans or something like that, you are contributing to climate change. And you can see the companies, those particular companies acknowledging that and actually doing something about it. There is much more to do, though. That's obvious because climate change is still happening. It's accelerating, unfortunately.
Do you think a side question, when it comes to change, people and decisions matter, right? Actions matter, perceptions matter. And I'm wondering whether, because we talk a lot about talent as well, we talk a lot about the next generation of leaders on this show. And we talk about diversity and inclusion a hell of a lot. So being very sort of straight talk with you right now, we often find that the boards of large companies, it's very common, are generally consistent with demographic, usually older white men, and you may have a few, people floating around from diverse backgrounds. And that's changing, thankfully, because of the whole focus on diversity and inclusion, and better things are happening. But do you think there's an opportunity in your industry or other industry, especially because insurance banking is kind of much sort of, there's a legacy, right, where insurance companies, banks have been around for a century sometimes or longer, and there is a way of doing things, and it's harder to change those organizations. In technology, we call it the technical debt. It's like the legacy infrastructure, all of the things you bought years ago that you have to unpack from. Do you think there's an opportunity to bring in a new type of talent? Because we find young people, Gen Z, even millennials, are thinking about society and giving back and altruism in that space. And climate, for example, if you look at the Greta Thunberg movement, last week we had Abdullahi, who is a social reformist, a young man, an incredibly inspiring young man from the World Economic Forum, talking about how young people can create revolutions. And we did ask him a question. We said, well, that's fine and that's amazing, but shouldn't you also operate and have these young people in large organizations creating positive revolutions? So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing either in your company or other companies around younger people coming in who really care about this stuff. What are your thoughts? How do you feel about that?
So there's a lot to unpack there. First, you said that boards are full of white old men. And then you said that it's the youth of today that will make the change. Yes. And actually, everyone has a part to play in making the change, and they do, and they do make that change. If I think about diversity and inclusivity when it comes to people, you asked me a question: what are we doing? So we're incredibly active with ESG and corporate social responsibility. We're at the top of the pile when it comes to voting against companies that don't have diverse boards. Top of the pile when it comes, divestment from climate harming, models and things like that. You can see that all the way through, and that's important because we've got the clout, the size, and the scale to be able to do that. I've got to let my cats out there, in front of me, wanting to be let out. So there you go. A bit of
Straight Talk Live, folks. Well, Straight Talk Live. Life happens, and we keep rolling.
There's a cat there as well.
That's going in the transcript. Brilliant.
We're gonna have a bloopers highlight at the end of all these anyway, so this is perfect. Keep going. That's great.
Where was I? I think a successful organization is one that draws in a diverse set of people. But by diversity and inclusivity isn't the same thing. You then have to be doing something with that diverse with that diverse set of people? How do you make them feel more inclusive? How do you empower them? How do you set the boundaries, the guide rails where people can feel that they're empowered and make a difference? I think that's part of that's what companies have to strive to do. But that's at all ages and all seniorities have a part to play in that.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you about technology, just to move more in the technology bucket for a moment. So when we talk about capitalism traditionally and trickle down economics, there's always this notion that the wealthy are going to keep getting wealthy, but then somehow that's going to magically trickle down to everybody else. And it's really good for everyone. And that just has not proven to be true. And we all kind of know that now. My question to you is more about, how do you see technology today, and the technology that you're savvy to, or that you're seeing on the horizon also? How do you see that evening the playing field, or opening up more opportunities for people? Like, how do you see technology playing a huge role in that maybe we never had that opportunity before because of today's tech?
I think so. Technology, the solutions are moving very quick. This is where it gets really, really exciting. It's like every day in my inbox, there's like another 30 requests for calls about another bit of tech. And whereas when I first started, 30 years ago, it would require a fairly large and expensive program to bring any bit of tech in. Nowadays, it's so much more plug and play. You can put in bits, you can pull out bits, depending where you're going with your business and where your customers want to go. I find that really, really exciting, and companies, can and have done much more with that. You started the beginning question in terms of, how it benefits people. We know in this country that people are scared of finance. It's like they don't really understand retirement. They don't understand that if you don't, the more you save, the more you get to retire on, and the more holidays there's no magic money tree. But people are scared, and not everyone can, afford or want to pay for a financial advisor. So this is where your technology, comes in. You can bring together not just your pensions and your savings, but also other apps in that same ecosystem, whether it's around well-being or how you might want to invest ethically, or what you might want to save up for, whether or not you link that to your bank account, or whether or not you want to link it to something else. I think that's where it comes alive. And through everything that I've just said, there's a thread where you can observe, are people getting more excited and passionate about this? Are they being drawn in? And that's where the data helps us. We can tell through data, we can see through data, whether or not what we're doing resonates with our customers. Mm-hmm. I think the final thing here is, so we've got a huge DC business in the UK, and what we're pushing out is the ability for the employers to see who is, which part of the United Kingdom, who's perhaps contributing more into their personal pension plans and who isn't. And they can use, again, some of our technology to then gently nudge them. If you save £5 more a week, you would retire on another £1,000, £1,000 a year, or whatever the math work up to. That's kind of interesting stuff as well. That's all kind of new for the industry.
Mm-hmm. So you're setting in the gentle nudge before the drone strikes to really inspire them. That was a joke.
I think so. But that's coming as well. Where Amazon come in with a drop it. You just spend £5 on this Amazon thing. You could have put £5 into your savings account. That's right. And your savings account would deliver this. It's a lot more powerful, and we're seeing that change.
Well, sorry, what was you used the term, just for the audience, DC?
Direct contribution. So your personal pension plan, where you're saving, 50, 100, £1,000, a year or a month into your pension plan.
And when you think about technology, just going back to the pension funds and the customers and the clients you've got in that space, do you often tend to talk to them as well? Is it, let's imagine I've got a pension and I put in £500 a month or something. Do I get to talk to an insurance company at some point, some sort of a customer rep who cares about me, and I feel that you do really care, and how do you use, if that is the case, how do you use technology? I'm referring to things like chatbots, or there's a lot of AI around voice sentiment analysis to see, especially during the pandemic, people are going through really tough times, whether it's unemployment or the mental well-being area is really being invested in heavily, because both workforce and clients and customers. Is there any cool technology you're using in that space?
You each ask about 7 questions in one question. So unpack that one. Starting with the COVID event.
Yeah.
I call it event. It created three things that I saw. One was that we all moved into a virtual world within 2 days. That was the first thing. The second thing, for all companies, COVID exposed the crunchy end of their operations, especially companies that had a lot of paper processes. That's going to be very hard in a virtual world. And the third thing, because everybody was locked down, they all moved into the digital world. Right. So those were the three things. So that presents 3 amazing opportunities as well. You also talked about well-being. I think COVID quite rightly homed in on well-being, but there were well-being challenges before COVID. If you use the example now of, I don't know, perhaps there's a couple in a studio flat or a 1-bedroom flat, and one person has to sit on the end of the bed, and you're not allowed outside. That has an impact in terms of well-being. But you can also imagine, a person that's spending a third of their income on, train travel, and sitting at a linear desk in an office eating their Pret sandwich. That's another kind of well-being challenge. We weren't necessarily focused on that before. Now we're focused on all of this. So, from a virtual working, there's an opportunity for organizations and people to move in a direction of work anytime, any place that suits me as an individual. I'm quite happy working from home. I like working from home. Other people like working from the office, and we collectively have to find a way of moving that forward. The crunchy end of operations, if you talked at the beginning about legacy stuff, there's somehow, and I come across so many people that say that somehow legacy is bad. I actually quite like legacy. You can do a lot with legacy. More often than not, it's incredibly cheap to run. But again, the latest tools, the latest fintech that you can buy, you can extract data. You can do an awful lot with your legacy. But what is pushed in terms of those crunchy end of the operations is much more into a technology world. Whereas before COVID, you might have to send in a physical death certificate. A lot of companies were doing that. If there's nobody physical, nobody's opening the envelopes, you have to move into a technology, take a picture, send it in, somehow make sure, verify it and make sure it's okay. And you have to do that within a matter of days, because you still have to pay your customers. Your customers could be vulnerable. We have a duty of care, as do other companies as well. So that required management to work through that very quickly. It's accelerated the whole digitization journey. That's something else that COVID is doing. And I can see that just from, it's like the uptick in roles for digital and data, where perhaps companies are cutting back elsewhere. There's an opportunity here to really push on and push ahead and push against a much more financial inclusion.
Fantastic.
Have I answered your 7 questions?
You have. I have many more, of course, but yes, you have. And I think I'll pull a thread from there, because firstly, it's refreshing to see. Firstly, I'm very excited about what you said earlier on. Isn't it nice to feel like, and I'm not being geeky about it, of course, because I'm certainly not a coder, but I'm a technologist and I'm into digital and I run my own company and so on in this space. But isn't it nice to feel like the digital revolution, we used to call it digital disruption 3, 4, 5 years ago, has just been exponentially accelerated. 5 or 6 years, I feel, of hard graft, if this didn't happen, would have been sort of the journey for us. And it's just boom, it's happened, and it's been good for people. It's been good for people because things have become faster, quicker, easier. I'm even seeing even my mother, who's 70 plus, while she was on mobile phones and so on, because she's at home a lot more and can't walk out and meet her friends and can't socialize, she is turning to more apps and tools on her iPad and her phone, and she's asking us questions saying, so what about this app? And should I use that app? And she's doing the yoga and she's doing Calm and she's doing... And it's wonderful to see because it's helping her. It's helping her just be more of a digital citizen. And more importantly, she's connected with her grandchildren a lot more because they kind of are the millennials or the Gen Z. So the impact of digital is amazing. So I'm really grateful for that. There's a piece around... the future organization. So think, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever time frame you think is fair. Where do you see, with now the shift in digital, where do you imagine your organization, if you can, 10 years out? What do you think it's going to look like?
So I won't imagine my organization. I'll imagine other organizations. And there's a reason for doing that. Okay. I was listening in on the other great thing about the COVID event is that you're drawn into these virtual roundtables. So many more people and subjects and conversations are much more accessible. So I was sitting in one of these roundtables and I was fascinated about the tech. I was slightly distracted about the tech. I got excited. But the man in front of me was talking about, when you hire in a CEO, perhaps a couple of years ago in some, I don't know, top 100 companies, each one of the countries, you're definitely looking for finance background, and that's what you would expect. You would never hire in a CEO, and his or her first question was, I don't know what a balance sheet is. But where this guy was going was, yeah, we do that all the time with technology. So me as a technologist, I spend a lot of my time, taking people along an agile path, or what is an API, or what, microservices. And I don't think we should do that. I think that should come, people should be inquisitive. In other words, in 5 to 10 years' time, I think your CEOs will just be as technically literate as they are financially literate, because it matters. The two have to go hand in hand, and that'll have an amazing impact on the business. I've always got maybe I'm being controversial here because I sit in technology. The idea that technology somehow answers to the business, and the business is a non-technologist, I find strange. Together, all teams should be there for the customer. You get the customer excited, they will buy more, and that generates the shareholder value. And if you wrap that up, because the conversation is financial inclusion, then you're in a pretty good. And I think that will change as well, whereby it's not just perhaps the selling teams and the marketing teams or the customer services teams that are at the front. It's also all of the technology teams as well. There are companies that do that model and do it very well. I think that would be a change. And I think it will all be anchored in a very agile workforce, not agile capital A in terms of delivery methodology, but where you get to work anywhere you want. But we're not all sitting in offices in linear desks. That actually we're using those spaces to collaborate. And this technology that we're using at the moment just moves on in leaps and bounds.
That's fantastic. Yeah, sorry, go on, Rick.
You bring up an interesting point there, Robert, that it really does come down to how much value are we really providing, as in all of our cross-functional teams together, and how are we really doing that at the end result to the client. And it just makes sense that the more that the client is going to be served, your customer, they're going to, want to stay with you. They're going to want to keep buying things or engaging with you and being in your part of your community, whatever that's going to look like. So it's interesting where a lot of companies can be seen still as very profit driven and looking out only for themselves. And other companies are getting, wait a minute, if we actually really do serve the larger ecosystem, that's how we win. Right. And so there's this like service to self and service to other. And sometimes, you need to have a little bit of both, of course, for a healthy, equitable balance. But so often in our legacy, we've had much more service to self. We're going to extract what we get from our territory, our market share, all those things. How are you seeing the landscape shift? And does it seem more just like a PR move where it just looks good, sounds good for the media sound bites? Or like where are you seeing change really happen where people are really getting that being part of the ecosystem means being part of the ecosystem?
So your first point that somehow it's always profit that comes first, I probably wouldn't agree with that. Maybe that's my liberal/Labour background, but I wouldn't say that all corporations on the planet are there for profit. Obviously, you have to make a shareholder return, and profit is part of it. But you may get that profit by delivering things that people want, that improves their lives, that improves the collective lives. And hopefully doesn't destroy the planet in doing so. I think that's important.
Agreed.
I want to take the conversation a slightly different pathway here, which relates to so the pandemic's happened, we're still dealing with it, but the next big kind of tsunami or a sense of concern or fear that we've picked up in the sessions we've been running with different people is around security. Whether you call it cyber security, cyber terrorism, cyber warfare. And there's a lot of press around this. There has been for years, of course. And, we've had security talked about. It's part of your, as a technology leader, it's part of your mandate. You buy in security software. You do everything you can to protect the organization. What are your thoughts around whether it's your view in the role right now or otherwise outside in, inside out, both work? What is your view around cybersecurity, cyber terrorism, given that digital is rife now and more people will be going online and more of this going on, more virtual roundtables? Do we need to be worried about the fact that we're exposing ourselves? Is there a sort of a hole in the system and our data is going to be sucked out and taken away? And tell us a little bit about where is your head at as both two hats, leader and then just a consumer of it? What's your view?
So, as a consumer, I absolutely care about where my data is going and what people are doing with it, and whether or not it's secure. And whilst I have a part to play in that, I think the corporation that I'm using, in the transaction, has an absolute duty of care to protect my data, myself, to the highest principles. Imagine with Face ID that Apple got hacked, and I've only got one face. I can change my password. I can't change my face. It's or your finger thing. These are big things. Apple absolutely has to protect my face. My face is unique, and I don't want it stolen. And that kind of rounds it home. As a leader. So, it's like some companies, who perhaps come from a direction of big data centers, protect the perimeter, a lot of legacy, and there's a lot of companies like that. And then you're wanting to draw in the cloud, because you've got your consultants. We've moved on from outsourcing to big data. Now it's cloud and cloud enablement. The challenge with cloud, as well as all of those fintech companies that I talked about, it's so much easier to spin up bits of servers all over the globe with multiple cloud companies and start deploying these fintech pieces of software. And it's not just about do you slam the lid shut on that? Nobody in any of these corporations are allowed to do that. Because you're operating in perhaps the pre-world of data centers, protect the periphery and everything else. There's a cultural change as well. I think I'm getting to the cultural change. And this is where a lot of organizations, it's like whether or not you're bringing in agile or you're wanting to have a digital transformation or you're wanting to go cloud, you will only be successful if you recognize the cultural transformation that has to take place at the same time. And you have to do that because absolutely, back to you have a duty of care to protect your customers' data. It's not my data. It's an individual's data.
Right. So in other words, do you think cybersecurity is the next big thing to worry about? Given what we've
I think everyone's already worrying about it, and they've been worrying about it for a number of years. I don't think it's the next thing. Again, across multiple organizations, you can see an uptick in spend. You can see an uptick in capabilities. 5 years ago, how many companies had CISOs? How many companies now, 5 years later, do not have a CISO?
Yeah, that's a chief information security officer. For those who are not familiar with that term, what do you think about hiring and talent? Because again, we have, as we go digital, we have all of these job opportunities coming up: data scientist, Python developer, etc., etc. And you have all of these incredible tech titans who seem to be vacuuming a lot of the talent globally, for good reason. And then the more traditional companies that are now going digital, I tend to refer to companies as dwindlers, Darwins, or disruptors. So the dwindlers who've woken up and smelt the coffee and become Darwins, and aspirational disruptors are saying, right, we've got to spend more on digital, we've got to hire more people, but then not enough data scientists. I mean, it's around the world. We don't have enough technology resource or talent to hire, and we're all a bit of an arms race going on. Do you see the kind of hiring and resourcing models changing as well? Like, do you think a big company like Legal in General will start working off the gig economy, or looking at open talent models rather than having people on payroll? Is that a consideration for you guys or the companies that you see out there as well?
So we've already, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've already shifted substantially. Something as simple as we used to have an IT and change job family, ITC. That means something. The IT is over there, change is in the middle, and the business is somewhere over there. That's a big cross, and it's now digital job families. It's about agility. It's about the engineers and DevOps. It's about empowerment as well to those to those teams. And I always try, there's a hierarchy. I think the challenge with big corporations is that sometimes there's a hierarchy, and it's important that the hierarchy doesn't get in the way of those teams of engineers and UX designers and the rest of it. They're the ones that are creating the value for the customers. Yeah. So I always ask, my job is to unblock for those teams, and I keep asking the question to the Scrum teams: how many times do you have to ask permission? Because in a perfect world, you wouldn't, because they would be delivering the value all of the time. And in that world, you're drawing your engineers and your UX designers, all the people that make up the Scrum team, much closer to the customer, and that's really important. You're putting the customer into the into the building, and the rest of us, like me, just shouldn't get in the way. We set strategy and vision and unblock. I think in terms of the question around, again, with COVID, so what's also happening now, you can work any place, anywhere. You no longer have to be present. So now you can tap into talent all over the globe. Right. And I can see quite quickly where rather than being tied to one employer, you can be tied to a number of employers. There's much more piecemeal work, because it's easier to do in the virtual world. The same as I can jump out of this conversation and jump into another virtual conversation. So you should be able to do the same if you're an engineer. And I think that's just on the horizon.
Nice.
Let me ask you about this. We've been talking a little bit about, of course, the digital technology that's driving the processes involved in creating inclusive capitalism. How are other companies implementing these ideas? What are you seeing in the space in terms of technology really enabling a more inclusive market?
I think some are doing so. There are similar companies to ourselves. We know that we've joined forces with some of them. There are other companies that are incredibly interested in finding out more, and there are also companies where we can learn from as well. And I think that's also really interesting and exciting. And I think I found that people tend to be quite open about some of the opportunities and some of the challenges.
Mm-hmm. And just curious, do you have any specific examples of how you're seeing that happen in the space?
I don't want to get drawn into individual names. And
you don't have to name names. I guess more I'm curious is just I'm still trying to get more of a real grounded sense.
Yeah. So if I think about tech ecosystems, so if we're coming up with a savings or retirement ecosystem, or you're talking about later life, and you've got things like open finance, open insurance, open banking, and you've got fintech companies that are starting from the ground up with microservices and APIs. That plug and play thing that I talked about 30 minutes ago. That conversation around that ecosystem concept, That's what I mean. And it's like those fintech companies or those other microservices, they could be owned by very small companies, mid-sized tech companies, or even other financial services companies. And that's where you get the conversation as well. You're plugging somebody else's bit of tech. It's monetized for them. But we've thought of a way of how to perhaps better engage with customers, whether it's just the engagement or better products, different products, and the services and tools to help them make their decisions.
Do you see, just going back to that point, the going back to the ecosystems example that you shared earlier on, when you think about backing, I know Legal & General in particular, and many other insurance companies have obviously the investment arm of their business that, of course, you're also part of, and that investment arm, directly or indirectly, cares about a lot of things, including taking equity positions in exciting companies. So whether through partnerships with venture capital organizations or themselves, we're starting to see insurance companies develop their own VC arms or corporate venture capital arms that are clearer, more direct, and so on. When you think about inclusive capitalism and you think about this concept of R&D, and I don't mean R&D in the pure sense, which is like, a bunch of guys in the trenches with big sort of rigs coming up with new ideas and code. That's one part of it. The other is the R&D related to energy. You talked about wind power a second ago and alternative sources of energy. When you're trying to create cultural transformation in an organization and your workforce is really looking up to the brand and saying, wow, I'm part of this cool company that cares about society. We are practicing inclusive capitalism. What sort of advice or guidance, it's not about your company per se, what sort of, if someone's, CEO was consulting you and says, Robert, what should I do when it comes to R&D? How can I spend more? How can I do more with R&D inside and outside the company to push forward the mandate of inclusive capitalism? What sort of things would you say? What would you say? Blank check.
And so you can't, damn cats are fighting now. You can't, so first, you can't greenwash. It's important not to greenwash. And there have been examples where companies have greenwashed. I think it's cynical. They usually get found out as well. It's easy to drill down. It's just a marketing thing. Yeah. I think you have to put in your investments to back up what you're saying you're doing. So from a Legal & General perspective, we've got a partnership with Oxford University, £4 billion worth of investment, and that's to build out research labs, accommodation, partnership in order to provide research. And we do that in a number of cities. We've taken a stake in a nuclear fusion company. These are interesting things, and again, it all helps with the facts on the ground that actually Legal & General aren't just saying we're financially inclusive. We're actually doing it as well. It's not the case that we're busy saying that other people's boards aren't gender diverse. Ours are as well. It's not the case that somehow we're voting against other companies because they're not carbon neutral. We're also we've also got a solid plan of how we're going to be carbon neutral. And the houses that we build, a good example is that we have a modular homes company. We have a brick building company as well. And within a few years, they will also be carbon neutral. We've taken stakes in ground source pumps, company. All of that helps by pushing not just our business into a carbon neutral world, but also the customers that participate with us as well. We're also taking them and they're together in a carbon neutral direction. That's really exciting, and it's all bound up with technology. A lot of those investments are from a technology angle, not necessarily a digital what you see on an iPhone, but whether it's transmission or how you get more electric generated from solar cells and so on. That's equally as important.
Bang on. Well, I'm getting excited about all. It's great to know this, and a lot of our listeners and audience who's going to listen to this live and replay. I think one of the things that's very important, why we invited you on the show, of course, is as a corporate leader, is because we've almost gone through a phase with Straight Talk Live. We started off with, of course, the concern around the pandemic, mental well-being. We had psychologists, we've had historians, we've had business leaders, and so on. And we've talked about the sort of the pain, the trauma that's come from all of this. And we're now sort of moving towards the phase of hope. And we're trying to look at the light at the end of the tunnel, both from the point of view of all the other things I've talked about, but also big companies. Big companies, it almost feels like big companies are actually going to get better in the future, because this conversation would never have happened 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, frankly. And we certainly would have met on this forum, and we wouldn't have that ambidexterity where you're here now and minutes later you're somewhere else having another conversation with another group of people. So we feel hopeful. And with that in mind, actually, I just want to make sure that folks who are on the show, through all the channels, if you want to ask questions, now is a good time, because we're coming to the close of the show. And feel free to throw that our way. For the audience, whilst that's coming in, Robert, for the audience out there, what has been your sort of experience of? I know you're going through your own transformations, personal and professional, I'm sure, like we all are. What has the pandemic meant for you? And if I may, more personally rather than professionally, what have been the behavioral changes, habits, mindset, lifestyle changes that you've experienced? It'd be good to hear for those who sometimes think that corporate leaders are a million miles away from them, because we're all kind of the same in many ways.
So COVID, the event has affected and impacted everyone, albeit in different ways. Some have been through health, some have been through economically, and everyone from a well-being perspective. But I think that focus. So would I have polled our staff a year ago, do you want to work from home? But we're doing that now. And when I've done that, and only one person wants to come back to the office full time. We have to pay attention to that. Why? Because we still want to recruit in staff. It's shifted. You asked the question about employing people. It's shifted. We have to take that into account. The other focus that we both talked about was well-being. Whereas perhaps it was recognized pre-COVID, it is an entire focus now, and you can see it in the newspapers. You can see it what we're doing as well, and that's also rolled up in this as well. Us as individuals matter, and our well-being matters as well. And in a corporation, which is a collection of us, we have to come together to make sure that we recognize that. I think that will help inclusivity. I really do. So if we all took time out to better get to know the person next to you, you're creating much more of an inclusive. That helps with trying to bring together teams to solve challenges, whether it's customer challenges or societal challenges, or climate change challenges. And I think that's quite powerful. I think that's also a direction of travel that we're rapidly moving in. The genie's been let out of the bottle, and I don't think the stop is going to be put back in. And I'm really happy that's the case.
Yeah, we'll capture that as a quote, actually. The genie. That's a powerful quote.
I knew I would get quoted.
Yeah, of course, without question. We're actually launching at the end of, as we're having a sort of informal chat here as well, we're launching the Straight Talk Live, book of disruptive ideas and conversations. Because, of course, we've had so many powerful conversations on the same sort of issue, but with different lenses, people providing their own perspective. A philosopher, a historian, like a Charles Eisenstein, who you're probably familiar with, he's coming on the show again, versus a academic from Berkeley University who is, like Jody Halpern, who's the head of empathy there. Everyone's got very similar but different viewpoints on where we are now and where we're going to end up. And there's so many variables. It's complex. It's not, unfortunately, it's not straightforward. And we're putting this book together. Every year we've decided at the end of every year, we're going to put a book together where we're going to have the transcripts of the conversations, i.e. the quotes and the big messages, of course. And we're hopeful that this form of content and this dialogue that you're having, and you're being as open as you can be, is going to help our audiences. We have academics listen to this. We have entrepreneurs. We have young people who are looking for jobs, of course, coming out of university. A lot of them are kind of depressed, some hopeful, but they're a little bit disparaged by the fact that there's not enough employment. They spent years trying to educate themselves. So we have to think about that generation. The same generation who came on a show a few months ago, who said, the MBA was a total waste of money and time. And so that was debated by the head of MBA at UCL. To those who I think you're going to help, who say, I think it's your statistic, and I got it from, I think, your website, that only 33% of UK millennials on the property ladder versus baby boomers, which was about 60% at the same stage. So we need the help of large enterprise who've got resources and money and wherewithal and foresight to help these generations. So we're really grateful that you've come on the show and you've been open about your ideas and your thoughts. Any last, Rick, anything that's burning with you and you want to sort of the last few questions before we close off?
I think where I always get excited, Robert, is like being a futurist and just trying to imagine the future. And so I just want to hear, is there anything else that you would love to share of the things that are exciting you in the space that you think could really make a difference in the next year or so?
I think that, we were talking about this, we were on holiday last week. It's the whole stay at home and shopping thing, rather than having, if you think about everybody's moved online, you've still got pages and pages and pages of linear clothes or objects or things like that. And if you get back to an individual, I like touching and feeling things. If I'm trying clothes on, or I want to open a fridge door, or whatever, and the bigger the price point, the more I want to touch. Again, that's just my preference. I think where the AR is going, so virtual reality is going. I think companies will move much more rapidly in that direction. In other words, you can spin things in a three-dimensional plane. You can do that already, but the sophistication will just become better, and it'll become more personalized to my preferences. I think that will rapidly happen because these companies have to differentiate themselves, not just on price or whether or not you can pay within 3 seconds, but also the personal experience. There's something about going to, Selfridges or a town centre or wherever and having lunch out. Not everything can be at home. And I know I'm talking about in a lockdown scenario, but we're still restricted. That'd be interesting and exciting.
There's a question that's come in from social media. I'm
glad somebody's asking a question.
Yeah. They're a few. We select them depending on what they are. We'll see what the feedback is as well later. But so the question is, can you, in one word answers or bunch of words, can you share some, this, I think this kind of relates back to this inspiration, hope thing going forward. So a few words from Robert that would summarize or give us an idea of hopeful words of what the future may look like. So single bursts of words I think this person is looking for, sound bites. So just throw a few out that you believe make up the future.
Agility. I think that's I think that's a very good word. I think the customer centricity. I think I, as an individual, matter, and that needs to get woven. And there's just more opportunity for me and I to do what I want rather than trying to fit in with others. I think that's important, but it's equally important that we can come together and improve things. There you go. That sounds like 20 words.
Brilliant. No, that's brilliant. I matter. That's
I like that.
That's really good. It's profound. It's important. Before we say goodbye to you, could you give us a sense of how's the last 58 minutes been for you? Any feedback for us? We're always looking to do things better and be sharper. But how's this experience been for you today, Robin?
I think it's been really good. The only thing I'd be interested in is some kind of like counter of who's dropped in, who's dropped off, and where people are in the globe. That would be interesting.
Yeah, we're trying to consolidate because we've got Facebook Live and we've got YouTube. We're trying to find a way. If you have a technology that you can share with us, then tell us. We're trying to find a way to get all the stats together in one place. We haven't quite cracked that code yet. Hence, we've got Denise looking at the social media channels, and we're here on Zoom. But we will do that for the next show. And thank you so much. You've been fantastic. Thanks for your time, for your energy, and your passion. And we wish you well for your future ambitions and goals. And please stay in touch with us. And please look after yourself, and thank you for supporting Straight Talk Live.
Rick, Denise, thank you. Been amazing.
And really quick, Robert, where can people find out more about you? Where should they go?
Oh, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay. Robert Jamieson at LinkedIn. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
And for everyone else, just want to let you know that we are going to be going live next week, same time. We touched on this a little bit today, but we're going to double click on this in a much deeper way next week around data privacy. Is it on life support? Is it dead? Is it defunct? What can we do to actually protect ourselves? What should companies be doing to be more responsible that way? We're going to have two amazing experts in Anurag and Matteo, who's a return guest, to really look at this deep dive around data security and privacy issues. So if you care about your privacy and security, you're not going to want to miss that show. All of you, thank you so much for tuning in, and you can always check out our replays on Spotify, iTunes, and you can always go to our website at straighttalk.live to catch anything as far as speaker notes, what we're up to project-wise, and the different initiatives that we have to try to really bring this work to you out there in the world. So, Af, thank you again. Thank you, Denise, for all of your incredible support behind the scenes and our whole team. And may everyone have an incredible day today, incredible evening wherever you are in the world, and keep straight talking with those around you. That's how we're going to make this world a better place.
All the best. Thank you. Good night.
Adios.